Your soulmate is secretly working with the police. The truth they are hiding will shock you. My beloved child. Your soulmate has been keeping something from you, but it is not the secret you might expect. Behind closed doors, away from the people who normally know every move they make, your soulmate has been quietly cooperating with the police. And what makes this even more unsettling is how carefully everyone involved has tried to keep you from discovering it. There have been private conversations, unexplained meetings, a number your soulmate was told never to save in their phone. At first, they believed they were simply helping investigators answer a few questions about someone they knew. But then the questions became more specific. The officers began asking about dates, conversations, and one particular person who had been watching your soulmate far more closely than anyone realized. That was when your soulmate understood this was not a routine matter. Someone had placed them near the center of an investigation, and somehow, your name had surfaced too. But why? Don't skip, because the answer your soulmate received was even stranger than the question. The moment your name was mentioned, your soulmate reportedly stopped the conversation and demanded to know exactly what the police had discovered. The investigator did not immediately answer. Instead, a folder was placed on the table containing information your soulmate had never seen before. There were records of unusual communications, a timeline stretching back much further than expected, and one detail connecting someone from their familiar circle to something investigators had been quietly examining. Your soulmate suddenly realized why certain people had been behaving differently. Why one person had started asking innocent-sounding questions about you. Why another seemed unusually interested in whether you and your soulmate were still communicating. None of those moments had seemed important individually. Together, they formed a pattern. And here is the question your soulmate could not stop thinking about: if someone had been gathering information about both of you, what exactly were they trying to learn? The police had a theory, but they needed your soulmate to do something difficult before they would explain everything. They asked your soulmate to behave normally. No confrontations. No sudden accusations. Most importantly, they were told not to reveal the investigation to anyone who might accidentally alert the person being watched. That is why your soulmate became secretive. That is why certain calls ended abruptly and certain explanations never sounded complete. It was not because they had stopped caring about you. They were carrying information they had been specifically asked to protect while investigators determined what was actually happening. But then something changed. During one quiet meeting, an officer showed your soulmate a new piece of information that had arrived only hours earlier. Your soulmate stared at it, read it twice, and immediately asked one question: does this mean they knew all along? The officer's response changed the entire direction of the investigation. Because the person the police had been watching was apparently not acting alone, and when your soulmate saw who investigators believed was secretly connected to that person, they recognized the name instantly. The name belonged to someone your soulmate had trusted for far too long. Not a stranger. Not some distant person who could easily be dismissed. This was someone who had been close enough to hear private conversations, notice changes in your soulmate's behavior, and quietly learn details about the connection between the two of you. Your soulmate's first reaction was disbelief. They insisted there had to be another explanation. But the investigator calmly revealed that the connection had been discovered through a series of communications that followed an unmistakable pattern. Every time something important happened between you and your soulmate, information somehow traveled back to the person under investigation. Sometimes within hours. And then came the detail that made your soulmate go completely silent. One of those communications contained information that only a very small number of people should have known. Suddenly, this was no longer about suspicion. Someone close had been feeding information into the shadows. But the police still refused to say what that person ultimately wanted from you. Your soulmate wanted to warn you immediately, yet investigators urged them to wait until they understood the full picture. One premature conversation could cause the person involved to disappear, destroy evidence, or simply change their behavior before investigators could establish what was really happening. So your soulmate agreed to continue cooperating, even though keeping you unaware became harder every day. They began noticing things they had previously ignored. A familiar person asking where you might be. Casual questions about whether you had spoken recently. Strange attempts to discover what your soulmate planned to do next. Even an innocent-looking message suddenly carried a completely different meaning. And then your soulmate decided to test something. Without revealing the investigation, they casually mentioned a small piece of false information to only one person. Nothing dramatic. Just a harmless detail that could be traced if it traveled any further. What happened next confirmed the fear your soulmate had desperately hoped was wrong. Less than a day later, investigators contacted your soulmate again. The false detail had surfaced exactly where they predicted it would. There was now little doubt about where the information was coming from. But instead of immediately confronting the person, the police revealed something even more disturbing. They believed this individual was only one link in a much larger chain. Someone else appeared to be directing the questions, deciding which information mattered, and keeping their own identity hidden behind other people. Stay with this, because your soulmate was about to discover why the investigation had become so secretive in the first place. An investigator opened another file and showed them a timeline containing several names, dates, and carefully documented connections. Near the bottom was an entry your soulmate recognized immediately. It referred to an event from the past that both of you might have considered completely insignificant. But according to the police, that single event was where everything had started, and beside it was one handwritten note that made your soulmate's heart sink. They were watching before either of them knew. Your soulmate could not stop staring at that sentence. If the police were right, the strange attention surrounding both of you had begun long before the recent questions, secret meetings, or suspicious messages. The investigator pointed to the old event on the timeline and explained that someone present that day had quietly taken an unusual interest in your soulmate afterward. At first, nothing about it appeared serious. A few questions. A request for information. Someone casually trying to understand who mattered most in your soulmate's life. But months later, investigators found the same name connected to another conversation, and then another. Your soulmate immediately remembered a moment they had completely forgotten. Someone once asked about you with a level of curiosity that now seemed impossible to dismiss. The question had sounded harmless then. Now it felt calculated. And suddenly your soulmate understood something terrifyingly simple. Whoever was behind this had not discovered you accidentally. They had been trying to understand your importance from the beginning. But the next revelation changed everything again. Investigators explained that they still did not believe you were the original focus. Your soulmate was. Someone had apparently been studying their relationships, routines, and trusted circle, searching for a vulnerability they could use to influence them. Then you entered the picture more clearly, and the strategy shifted. Your soulmate asked the obvious question. Why would anyone care this much about my personal life? The officer hesitated before answering, because the investigation had uncovered a connection your soulmate had never known existed. Something from their past, something they believed had been settled and forgotten, was tied to the person quietly directing everything. Your soulmate immediately began searching their memory. An old disagreement? A former friend? Someone who believed they had been betrayed? None of those explanations fully matched what investigators had found. Then the officer placed a photograph on the table, and your soulmate recognized the face before a single word was spoken. That recognition created a problem the police had not expected. Your soulmate knew this person, but not in the way investigators assumed. Years earlier, there had been one brief encounter that seemed completely ordinary at the time. Yet your soulmate suddenly remembered something the police did not have in their file, a strange sentence that person had said before walking away. Back then, it sounded meaningless. Now it sounded like a warning disguised as casual conversation. Your soulmate repeated those words to the investigator, and the entire room changed. Another officer immediately left to make a call. Someone pulled up a record on a computer. Within minutes, they discovered that the same phrase had appeared somewhere else in the investigation. That could not easily be dismissed as coincidence. Something huge was waiting for you, because when the investigator returned, they no longer wanted your soulmate simply providing information. They wanted your soulmate involved in one carefully controlled conversation, and the person they needed them to speak with was someone your soulmate had never expected to face again. The request caught your soulmate completely off guard. The police wanted them to speak naturally with this person, without revealing that investigators already understood far more than anyone suspected. Every word mattered now. Your soulmate would not accuse them, mention the hidden communications, or expose the investigation. Instead, they would bring up that forgotten encounter from years ago and watch carefully for one specific reaction. The investigators believed the person might reveal something simply by trying too hard to hide it. Your soulmate agreed, but one question kept bothering them: why was this conversation suddenly so important? Then an officer revealed a fresh discovery. Someone had recently tried to find out whether your soulmate had spoken to the police. That meant the hidden person was becoming nervous. Somehow, they sensed the circle was tightening, even though they did not yet know what investigators had uncovered. When the conversation finally happened, your soulmate expected denial, confusion, maybe even laughter. Instead, there was a pause. Just a little too long. Your soulmate casually mentioned the old meeting, and the person immediately remembered details they should barely have recalled after so much time. Then came something even stranger. They asked whether your soulmate had found anything unusual lately. Your soulmate had never mentioned finding anything. The investigators had warned them to listen for exactly this kind of mistake, knowledge appearing before it had been shared. So your soulmate stayed calm and asked what they meant. The person quickly changed the subject, but the damage was already done. Moments later, they mentioned you indirectly, asking whether you were still involved in everything. Everything? Your soulmate felt their stomach tighten. What exactly did this person believe you were involved in, and how much did they already know about your connection? Afterward, your soulmate returned to the investigators and repeated the conversation almost word for word. One phrase immediately caught their attention. The officer opened the timeline again and connected that phrase to several earlier communications. Suddenly, separate pieces began forming one disturbing picture. The person your soulmate had just spoken with appeared to know about information they should never have possessed. But then investigators uncovered something that made even that revelation seem small. The communications were not simply tracking your soulmate or asking questions about you. They appeared to be searching for one particular piece of information, something they believed your soulmate had received without realizing its importance. Your soulmate insisted they had nothing unusual. No mysterious package. No secret document. Nothing that made sense. Then the investigator asked them to think carefully about anything another person had given them months earlier, even something completely ordinary. Your soulmate froze. Because suddenly they remembered one object they had kept without thinking twice, and when they told the police where it came from, the officer immediately said, "We need to see that." Your soulmate had almost forgotten the object existed. Months earlier, someone they trusted had handed them a small envelope and asked them to keep it temporarily, saying it contained nothing important. Life moved on, the person never asked for it back, and your soulmate eventually placed it inside a drawer with old papers and forgotten belongings. Now, sitting across from investigators, that harmless memory suddenly felt different. The police asked one question after another. Who delivered it? Was anyone else present? Had your soulmate ever opened it? Most importantly, did the person who gave it to them know about you? That final question changed your soulmate's expression. Because the answer was yes. Not only did they know about you, they had once asked whether your soulmate trusted you completely. At the time, it sounded like casual curiosity. Now your soulmate wondered whether that question had actually been a test. Investigators accompanied your soulmate to retrieve the envelope, expecting perhaps a document or some ordinary clue that would explain the unusual interest surrounding it. But when your soulmate carefully opened it, the contents seemed almost disappointing: an old photograph, a folded receipt, and a handwritten note containing several numbers. Nothing immediately looked extraordinary. Then one investigator noticed something on the receipt. A date. It matched an entry on the timeline almost perfectly. Another officer compared the numbers from the note with information already collected during the investigation, and suddenly everyone became quiet. Your soulmate asked what they had found, but instead of answering directly, the lead investigator asked whether anyone had recently tried to enter that room, borrow those papers, or convince your soulmate to clear out old belongings. That question triggered another memory. Someone had done exactly that, and they had been strangely persistent about it. The person had offered to help your soulmate organize old things weeks earlier, even joking that keeping useless papers was unnecessary. Your soulmate had thought nothing of it. Now the timing looked completely different. The police believed someone had been searching for this envelope without being able to ask for it directly. But there was still one mystery: why? The photograph appeared ordinary, the receipt showed nothing obviously alarming, and the handwritten numbers meant nothing to your soulmate. Then investigators examined the photograph more carefully and noticed someone standing far in the background. Your soulmate leaned closer and recognized the location first. Seconds later, they recognized the person. It was the same individual they had just spoken with under police guidance. But there was something even more surprising. According to the date printed on the photograph, that person had been there on a day they repeatedly claimed they were somewhere else. And when investigators compared that date with their existing records, they discovered another name connected to the exact same location, a name your soulmate knew extremely well. That second name changed the atmosphere instantly. Your soulmate knew this person as someone who had always seemed dependable, someone who never appeared connected to anything secretive. Yet the police had records placing both individuals near the same location on the same day, despite each giving completely different versions of where they had been. Your soulmate struggled to understand why either person would lie about something that happened months ago. Then the investigator pointed toward the handwritten numbers from the envelope. They were not random. Several matched dates and times connected to meetings investigators had already identified. One matched the day the photograph was taken. Another matched the exact evening your soulmate first noticed someone asking unusually specific questions about you. Suddenly, the envelope looked less like forgotten clutter and more like a record someone desperately wanted recovered. But one number remained unexplained, and it was the only one circled twice. The police asked your soulmate whether the circled number meant anything personally. At first, nothing came to mind. Then your soulmate noticed how it was written and remembered seeing the same sequence somewhere before. Not in a message. Not on a document. It had appeared briefly on something belonging to the trusted person whose name investigators had just uncovered. That memory gave the police a completely new direction. They checked their existing records and discovered the sequence corresponded to a reference attached to information they had been trying to trace for weeks. Don't skip. This was the moment your soulmate realized the envelope had probably never been given to them for safekeeping by accident. Someone may have deliberately placed it with them because they were considered trustworthy enough not to examine it, and ordinary enough that nobody would think to search there first. But that raised the most unsettling question yet: was the person who handed over the envelope trying to hide something from the police, or protect something from the people now searching for it? Your soulmate suddenly could not tell who had been deceiving whom. The investigators admitted they were asking themselves the same thing. Then a new message arrived on the lead officer's phone. After reading it, the officer asked your soulmate to remain seated while another investigator stepped outside. Minutes later, they returned carrying a newly obtained record connected to the circled number. Your soulmate expected another unfamiliar name. Instead, the record pointed back to someone who had been present around them repeatedly during the exact period covered by the handwritten dates. Someone who had behaved completely normally. Someone who had even warned your soulmate months earlier to be careful about whom they trusted. And when your soulmate finally saw the name, one memory returned with terrifying clarity. That person had once asked, very specifically, whether the envelope was still somewhere safe. Your soulmate suddenly remembered the conversation almost word for word. The person had asked about the envelope casually, almost as if they were making conversation, but there had been a strange intensity behind the question. When your soulmate said it was probably still somewhere at home, the person relaxed immediately and changed the subject. That reaction meant something now. Investigators asked whether anyone else knew exactly where the envelope had been stored. Your soulmate could think of only 2 people, and one was already connected to the photograph. The other was the person whose name had just appeared in the new record. 2 trusted people. 1 hidden envelope. And both somehow connected to information being quietly tracked by the police. Your soulmate felt betrayed, but the lead investigator warned them not to assume both people were working together. The evidence suggested something far more complicated. One of them might actually have been trying to keep the envelope away from the other. That possibility forced everyone to reconsider what had happened. Investigators returned to the handwritten dates and noticed a pattern they had previously missed. Each time the first person appeared to make contact, the second person showed up shortly afterward, sometimes through a call, sometimes through an unexpected visit, sometimes by asking your soulmate an innocent question. It looked almost like one person was following the movements of the other. But which one was protecting your soulmate, and which one was searching for the envelope? Then the police uncovered a message that changed the balance. It had been sent months earlier and contained only a few words: "They still don't know what they have." Your soulmate immediately asked who sent it. The investigator hesitated, then revealed that the message had come from someone associated with the person in the photograph. Suddenly, the repeated questions about you made more sense. Someone believed your soulmate possessed information without understanding its value. Then your soulmate noticed something the investigators had overlooked. The handwritten note did not contain only numbers. Along one edge, nearly hidden beneath a fold, were 3 faint letters written in pencil. Your soulmate recognized those initials. They belonged to the person who had originally handed over the envelope. When investigators examined that section more closely, they found another tiny marking beside the initials, a date that had not appeared anywhere else in their records. The date was only days away. Stay till the end, because this was no longer merely about uncovering something from the past. Whatever the envelope represented, someone had apparently expected something to happen very soon. The police immediately began checking the date against everything they had collected. After several tense minutes, one investigator found a match buried inside another record. It referred to a private meeting that had not happened yet. And beside that meeting was a location your soulmate recognized instantly, because it was somewhere you and your soulmate had once planned to go together. The location made your soulmate's pulse race, not because it was dangerous, but because almost nobody knew it mattered to the 2 of you. It was a quiet place connected to a private memory, somewhere mentioned only in a handful of conversations. Yet somehow that exact location appeared beside the upcoming date in a police record. Your soulmate immediately asked whether the meeting had anything to do with you. Investigators could not confirm that yet, but they revealed something important. The location had appeared once before in communications connected to the person in the photograph. That meant someone had known about it long before the police discovered the envelope. Your soulmate began replaying every conversation in which the place had ever been mentioned. Then one memory surfaced. Months earlier, a trusted person had overheard your soulmate discussing the possibility of meeting you there. And afterward, that same person had asked an oddly specific question about when you might go. Now the police had to determine whether the upcoming meeting was genuine or deliberately designed to draw someone out. They instructed your soulmate not to change any plans and, above all, not to contact the people whose names had surfaced. Then an investigator compared the faint date on the envelope with the receipt found inside it. There was a tiny printed reference beneath the total that nobody had considered significant. When entered into an old record, it pointed to a transaction made near that same location months earlier. The timing was remarkable. It happened less than an hour before the photograph was taken. Your soulmate asked who made the transaction, expecting another familiar name. Instead, investigators discovered it had been made using information connected to someone they had not yet considered important. That person had remained almost invisible throughout the entire investigation, appearing only indirectly through other people. But your soulmate recognized the description immediately. They remembered seeing this person once, standing near someone from their trusted circle, though they had never been formally introduced. At the time, the encounter lasted only seconds. Now investigators believed that brief appearance could explain why so many people seemed connected without openly communicating with one another. Something huge was waiting for you. The police pulled another record and compared the dates. The same individual appeared near 3 separate moments when information about you and your soulmate had unexpectedly traveled beyond the people who should have known it. Then came the detail nobody anticipated. This person had recently contacted the police voluntarily. They claimed they wanted to explain everything before the upcoming meeting took place. Your soulmate immediately asked why investigators had not mentioned this sooner. The lead officer answered carefully, because they still did not know whether this person was finally telling the truth, or whether their sudden cooperation was part of the secret everyone had been trying so desperately to hide. The police decided they could no longer rely on assumptions. They arranged a controlled interview with the person who had suddenly come forward, while your soulmate listened from another room. At first, the stranger spoke cautiously, claiming they had only been passing information between people and never understood the full purpose behind it. Then the investigator placed a copy of the photograph on the table. The stranger's confidence disappeared. They recognized the location, the date, and the 2 familiar people standing in the background. But instead of denying the connection, they said something your soulmate never expected: one of them was trying to stop this. That single sentence changed the entire investigation. Your soulmate had spent days wondering which trusted person had betrayed them. Now there was a possibility that one of those suspicious actions, the questions, unexpected visits, even the concern about the envelope, had actually been an attempt to protect something before the wrong person found it. Then investigators asked the question that had been hanging over everything: what was really inside the envelope that made it so important? The stranger explained that the photograph, receipt, and handwritten numbers were never valuable individually. Together, however, they created a timeline proving that certain people had secretly met while publicly claiming they had no connection. The envelope was evidence of deception, not some mysterious treasure. And the person who gave it to your soulmate had apparently chosen them for one reason: nobody involved believed your soulmate would open it. But there was another layer. The stranger claimed the upcoming meeting at the familiar location was supposed to settle the problem permanently by convincing everyone involved to destroy the remaining records and walk away. Your soulmate immediately asked whether you were expected to be there. The stranger hesitated. That hesitation was enough for the investigators to press harder. Finally, the truth emerged. Your name had been mentioned, but not because you were part of their secret. Someone believed you knew more than you actually did. That revelation explained the questions about your relationship, your conversations, and whether you and your soulmate were still in contact. They were trying to determine whether your soulmate had told you about the envelope without realizing what it contained. But just when the investigation seemed to make sense, the stranger revealed one final detail that shattered the new theory. The person who originally handed your soulmate the envelope had not acted alone. Someone else had instructed them to do it, someone who had never appeared in the photograph, the messages, or any obvious police record. Don't skip, because your soulmate immediately understood why that mattered. If this person had remained invisible while everyone else left traces behind, they might have been controlling events from much farther away than anyone realized. The investigator asked the stranger for a name. After several seconds of silence, the stranger wrote it on a piece of paper and pushed it across the table. Your soulmate could not see what was written, but the lead officer could. And the instant he read it, he stopped the interview and ordered his team to check one thing immediately: whether that person had already contacted you. For several tense minutes, your soulmate heard nothing from the other room. Investigators were checking old communications, comparing dates, and searching for any sign that the hidden person had already found a path toward you. Then the lead officer returned with an expression your soulmate had not seen before. There had been contact. But it was so ordinary that nobody had recognized its importance. A brief message. A harmless question passed through someone else. Nothing threatening, nothing obvious, just enough to discover whether you knew about the envelope or the investigation. Your soulmate immediately remembered another detail. Shortly before all the secrecy began, someone had asked whether you and your soulmate told each other everything. At the time, the question seemed personal. Now it sounded like information gathering. But the police had uncovered something even stranger. The person whose name was written on that paper had never contacted you directly. They had always used someone you would have no reason to distrust. That discovery brought investigators back to the trusted circle. They compared the indirect messages with the dates from the envelope and found the same intermediary appearing again and again. Your soulmate recognized the pattern immediately. Whenever this person asked about you, another communication followed soon afterward. But there was a contradiction. Some of those later messages appeared to contain deliberately inaccurate information. Someone inside the chain had been changing details before passing them along. The police now suspected that one of the people your soulmate believed was betraying them had actually been interfering with the information flow. That person may have realized what was happening and quietly tried to confuse whoever was directing it. Your soulmate asked why they would not simply go to the police. The answer came from the stranger in the interview room: because they were afraid nobody would believe them without proof. The envelope had been their proof. And your soulmate had unknowingly been protecting it the entire time. Then the lead investigator finally allowed your soulmate to see the name written on the paper. Recognition came slowly. They had heard it before, but only once, during a conversation months earlier when someone suddenly stopped speaking after realizing your soulmate was listening. That forgotten moment now became crucial. Your soulmate remembered exactly who had spoken the name, and it was the same trusted person investigators increasingly suspected had been secretly disrupting the information chain. So the police made a decision. Instead of waiting for the upcoming meeting, they would speak privately with that person first. But before anyone could arrange it, your soulmate's phone lit up with a new message. It came from that very person. There were only 7 words: "I know why you're with the police." Your soulmate stared at the screen, wondering how the secret had escaped. Then a second message arrived: "Please don't tell them until I explain." Your soulmate showed both messages to the lead investigator without replying. Instead of reacting with surprise, the officer asked one crucial question: how could this person know about meetings that had been deliberately kept private? The police had used different locations, limited who received details, and avoided discussing the investigation through ordinary messages. Yet somehow, the secret had reached exactly the person they were preparing to question. Investigators considered whether someone inside the wider circle had noticed your soulmate's movements, but your soulmate remembered something else. Days earlier, this trusted person had casually asked why their routine had changed. That question suddenly sounded less innocent. Still, the second message, "Please don't tell them until I explain," suggested fear rather than confidence. Your soulmate wanted answers immediately. The police agreed to let them respond with one carefully chosen sentence: "Then explain what I don't know." The reply came almost instantly. The envelope was meant to reach the police through you. That changed everything. According to the next messages, the envelope had never been hidden with your soulmate simply because they were unlikely to open it. The trusted person claimed your soulmate had been chosen as a safe bridge. Someone outside the secret arrangement who could eventually place the evidence in the right hands without being directly connected to its source. But the plan had gone wrong when another person discovered the envelope existed. From that moment forward, questions about you, your soulmate, and the location of old belongings had multiplied. The trusted person admitted to spreading false details because they were trying to make whoever was searching believe the envelope had already been moved. Suddenly, the contradictions investigators had found made sense. But one question remained unanswered. Why had nobody simply told your soulmate the truth? The response was chillingly simple: because we didn't know who around you was reporting back. And there was still one person the police had not identified. Before your soulmate could ask who that person was, the messages stopped. The investigator immediately tried another route to contact the sender, but there was no response. Then the officer reviewing the records noticed something that had been hiding in plain sight. Every major leak had occurred shortly after your soulmate spoke with someone from the same small circle, but not always the same individual. That meant investigators may have been looking for a person when they should have been looking for a shared connection. A group conversation. A mutual acquaintance. Somewhere information could travel without anyone realizing who was collecting it. Your soulmate began naming possibilities, and one stood out immediately: someone who had repeatedly positioned themselves as the helpful listener whenever problems arose. Someone who knew about you, knew about the envelope's original owner, and had even encouraged your soulmate to cooperate if the police ever contacted them. The lead investigator checked the name against the records. His expression changed. Because that person had already spoken with police weeks earlier. But under a completely different identity. The discovery forced investigators to reopen everything that person had told them. Weeks earlier, they had presented themselves as an unrelated witness who happened to know a few harmless details about your soulmate's circle. Their story had sounded believable because almost every fact they provided could be verified. But now the police noticed what was missing. The witness had carefully confirmed information investigators already possessed while steering them away from the envelope, the photograph, and the upcoming meeting. Your soulmate felt a cold realization settle in. This person had not merely been listening to everyone. They had been shaping what different people believed. When someone became suspicious, they offered reassurance. When your soulmate asked questions, they redirected the conversation. And whenever information about you appeared, they seemed to know about it surprisingly quickly. The police finally understood why the investigation had felt like chasing several different people at once. Someone had been standing between all of them, controlling which pieces reached which ears. Then your soulmate remembered the first time this person mentioned the police. It happened before your soulmate had officially been contacted by investigators. At the time, they had casually said, "If anyone ever asks questions, just tell them what you know." That sentence had seemed like ordinary advice. Now it raised an enormous question: how did they know questions were coming? Investigators searched the earlier interview and discovered another inconsistency. The person had described a conversation that supposedly happened after the photograph was taken, yet one small detail proved they must have known about the location beforehand. Your soulmate suddenly understood why the trusted person had warned that nobody knew who was reporting back. The hidden connection had been close enough to hear both sides while pretending to belong fully to neither. But there was still something the police could not explain. If this person wanted the envelope recovered, why had they repeatedly encouraged your soulmate to keep cooperating with investigators? The answer appeared when the silent trusted person finally sent another message. This time it contained only a photograph of a handwritten page and 3 words, "Read the bottom." Your soulmate enlarged the image while the investigator leaned closer. Near the bottom was a short note describing what was supposed to happen if the envelope reached police custody. The plan had anticipated that someone might try to interfere with the evidence, so one final piece had deliberately been kept separate. Suddenly, everything clicked. The envelope was never the complete proof. It was meant to make the hidden person believe investigators had found everything, while the most important record remained somewhere else. The lead officer asked where that final record was kept. Your soulmate read the next line and went completely still. It named a person entrusted with holding it until the right moment, a person who had never appeared anywhere in the investigation until now. And beside that name were 2 words your soulmate never expected to see: "Ask them." Your soulmate read the name again, trying to understand why someone so far outside the investigation would be trusted with its most important piece. This person was not part of the suspicious circle. They had never asked about the envelope, never appeared in the photograph, and never seemed interested in your relationship. That was precisely why they had been chosen. Investigators contacted them carefully, mentioning only enough information to confirm whether the handwritten note was genuine. There was a long silence on the other end. Then came an answer nobody expected. "I was told this call would come eventually." The person explained that months earlier, they had received a sealed packet with strict instructions